Recently, House Republicans passed their version of what healthcare in the United States should be, what they would replace the Affordable Care Act with. Well, there is some disagreement between the House and the Senate in regard to what that replacement should be. However, as everyone is focusing on Comey's testimony, the Senate is currently working on their version of what that replacement would be. And I want to give you some details on what we know so far. Now, I want to be clear that they have not released this legislation yet, so we don't know all the specifics, and things are likely to change before they release their version. However, this is what we know so far. Now, the broad outline discussed among members points to a slower phase out of Obamacare's Medicaid expansion than the House bill entails, and a shifting of tax credits from younger people to older people. Unlike the House version, the Senate bill may not allow insurers to set higher prices for people with pre-existing conditions than for healthy people. So it seems as though the Senate version, as far as we know at the moment, is a middle ground between the Affordable Care Act and what the House wants. And part of the reason why is because there are some members of the GOP in the Senate that are not as right-wing, I guess, when it comes to this issue. And it's not necessarily that they're not as right-wing. They understand that their constituents will retaliate against them if they vote for the House version of the replacement.
I think that's exactly what it comes down to. And I think a lot of these people, what we're hearing about from the Huffington Post article, where we're sort of speculating on what we can expect, they understand that it is in their best interest, if they want to get reelected, to they have to deal with Medicaid thoughtfully. It's not something that they can just sort of gut. So I've seen some stuff online where people are oddly sort of celebrating, like, oh, it's moderate Republicans, but I don't really think if that's exactly what's happening here. I think this is just people that are sort of trying to save their ass, make sure they get reelected. What I do think is interesting is apparently there is sort of a discussion going on right now from the Democrats on whether or not they should come to the table and negotiate, or whether they will. For now, Democrat leadership said they would stay away from any negotiations until Republicans dropped their insistence on a full repeal of Obamacare. So I think that that's sort of the debate that I'm looking for.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. I have some more details about what we know about the replacement so far, but I want to get into the topic that you brought up just for a little bit. So there are two possibilities that Democrats in the Senate are thinking about. Possibility number one is, okay, let's try to take advantage of the fact that there are some more moderate Republicans in the Senate. Let's see if we can get together with them and negotiate a version of the replacement that we're comfortable with. Okay, so that's option number one, which, if you have any interest in what I think, is a terrible option, and I really hope the Democrats do not do that. Option number two is that they stand firm and say, no, we are not replacing the Affordable Care Act. In fact, we want to build on it and expand it. And that will be a tougher sell, and that'll be a lot harder for them to do. But if they genuinely want to appeal to a more progressive base, then it's a bad idea to negotiate with Republican members, especially because Republicans, especially over the last few decades, just refuse to even negotiate with Democrats, right?
Well, it's one of those things where if they haven't come to the table before, they haven't been willing to negotiate. Now, a big criticism that a lot of people who would identify as Democrats, those are where their political leanings are, where they get frustrated with the leadership, is that it always seems that the Democrats are willing to sort of adhere to they're a little bit too strategic.
They're very willing to reach across the aisle, and
which is like
no, it's not good.
Okay,
so don't get me wrong. I'm all for working together. I hate how polarized things are, but things aren't polarized because Democrats aren't willing to negotiate. Democrats seem to always be willing to negotiate, whereas Republicans refuse to. Republicans stand firm and they always get what they want, right? And so if there was some indication that Republicans in the Senate wanted to work with Democrats and actually come up with a plan that would benefit the American people, then I'm in favor of that, but that is not what we've experienced during the Obama administration. That's certainly not what we're experiencing now during Trump's administration. And so I don't want them to negotiate.
Well,
right?
If it's any consolation, there's one senior Senate Democratic aide who said, quote, "There's no appetite as long as they're working towards repeal." So there are, it looks like there are some people on the Democratic side that are going to hold fast because they know that you have to protect the healthcare. It's such a weird thing to have to say. You got to protect healthcare. It's important to keep everyone covered, and there hasn't been a presentation, a plan that that is. I would like to think I'm open-minded enough that if the Republicans did present a plan where I'm like, all right, let's try this out, but there isn't that there, and I don't think that we're going to see it from the Senate.
And I want to be clear with the audience, based on what we know so far, the Senate version of the replacement isn't as bad as the House's version, but it's still bad.
Yeah.
They're still going to screw you, but they're going to screw you long and slow, okay? And hopefully it'll lessen the blow of pulling the rug out from under you. But it's not looking good so far. So another less problematic sticking point involves the Obamacare taxes, which the House bill would almost entirely eliminate. However, senators are exploring keeping some of those taxes in place, but that could be problematic for conservative members. So understand that there's a lot on the line with the Senate. Senate Republicans almost unanimously have to agree to this replacement plan. Only 2 senators can vote against it. And in that case, Mike Pence will come in and be the tiebreaker that essentially will pass it in the Senate. And so there are some Senate Republicans who are just on the border of all of this, okay? Senator Shelley Moore Capito from Virginia is one of them. Also, Dean Heller from Nevada is another senator who is unlikely to do away with the Medicaid component of the Affordable Care Act because it's popular among his constituents. So these are all things to keep in mind. But it is something that our lawmakers are currently focusing on while all this other stuff is going on. So it is important to talk about these stories. Now, faced with a Senate bill, the House would have several options. It could simply vote yes on the legislation. It could amend the bill and send it back to the Senate, or the 2 chambers could set up a conference committee and try to resolve their differences that way. So remember, whatever replacement is voted on in either chamber, the House and the Senate has to come to some sort of agreement, and it seems as though the House is a little more extreme on, to the right, and the Senate is less so.
Yeah, and then another thing, you were talking about the 2 swing votes, which I think is important if anyone's watching and you care about this. You can always write to your elected official. It's so easy to find a way to do that. They help you out with a script online. Just Google it. I promise you, it's easy to do. Goes on to say it's sort of up to Mitch McConnell to keep them in line, to rope them in. It's very sort of House of Cards-esque. You have these 2 swing votes, and we know that Mitch McConnell is a bully. And I hate to compare it to House of Cards, but that's sort of how I can see this play out. I can only imagine sort of behind the scenes how he doesn't want this to be an embarrassment. I mean, healthcare, it's a lot on the line for the Republicans.
And they've already been embarrassed with their inability to
imagine a second time.
I know, exactly. But keep in mind that lawmakers are less willing to vote in favor of repealing and replacing the Affordable Care Act because of what we experienced at those town halls, and because Americans from every political ideology, both on the left and the right, stood strong and indicated that they believe in a healthcare system that covers them in an affordable way. And even though the Affordable Care Act is extremely flawed and we need to build on it and improve it, it doesn't make sense to repeal it and then replace it with a plan that would do away with healthcare coverage for tens of millions of Americans. And that's not according to me, that's according to the Congressional Budget Office. So that's where we are right now, and of course we will update you guys as we find more on this story.
You don't like ads? I hear you, brother. You know how you can avoid ads for the Young Turks? Become a Young Turks member and get all the content ad-free. TYTnetwork.com/join.